We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. So the question of profit before planet is probably the key question at the heart of the issue. The balance between economic growth and environmental sustainability, a key question which must be solved if football is going to help achieve global warming targets. However, given the geopolitical stance of football in relation to nation building, soft power, and tourism, it could be suggested that the World Cup is a revenue generator in a number of ways. As an example, since Qatar won its bid to host the World Cup, the country's GDP has grown with an average growth of 4.5% over 11 years between 2010 and 2020 as an estimate. According to some, tourism is projected to reach 7.5 million by 2030. However, some would say hosting the World Cup was never focused on providing economic benefits for Qatar. Instead, the tournament is part of Qatar's national development and modernization plan. Which brings us back to the question of the impact of the World Cup from an environmental perspective, and is it possible to find ways to lessen the impact of the World Cup on the planet? When we talk about sustainability and carbon neutrality, it is imperative a realistic stance is openly communicated even if net zero cannot be achieved. Otherwise, the whole concept of sustainability and carbon neutrality becomes tainted. If communication is clear and precise, the general public would respect and understand that at this moment in time the challenge to achieve carbon neutrality is massive. Communication is not about spinning facts. It is about telling the truth, which brings along people in the process to achieve your collective goals. If spinning facts is the goal, then more harm is done from a reputational perspective in the long run. Leadership needs to be based upon factual foundations. Only then will all stakeholders know what their role is and what needs to be done to achieve these goals. Reports have come out that the claims of the World Cup being carbon neutral are deeply misleading. A lot of money has been spent on carbon credits in order to offset emissions they created while preparing for the World Cup, which is at the heart of the controversy around carbon neutrality of the tournament. According to the Carbon Market Watch, they conclude it is not credible. It's misleading claims. It's basically greenwashing. And it's highly unlikely that the World Cup is not going to have a carbon neutrality negative impact on the climate. There are two main reasons for that. The first is problems around accounting of emissions. The fact that they have massively underestimated key emissions, especially related to the construction of the stadiums. And the second issue is related to the carbon compensation. 1. Accounting of emissions. 8 stadiums will be in use in the 2022 World Cup, one of which has already been built before the World Cup but has undergone renovations before the tournament starts. The 6 new permanent stadiums in Doha is where the accounting gets really problematic, according to Carbon Market Watch. Essentially, what they have done is they have calculated the emissions associated with the construction of all of those stadiums. The total footprint of those stadiums is based on the existence of the stadiums lasting for 60 years. By all accounts, they have spread out the construction emissions, so not the emissions from the use of the stadiums, which logically is spread out over that period, but they have spread out the emissions from the construction of the stadiums over that 60-year period, saying the World Cup is only going to take place for 1 month. And so they say they are only responsible for the share of emissions that corresponds to this 1 month. So in essence, what they are saying is from the total emissions associated with the construction of the 6 new stadiums, they take responsibility for a share that is 1 month divided by 60 years. Which is then seen as an extremely small carbon footprint of the total emissions. And that's why Carbon Market Watch say this probably underestimates the emissions by about 1.4 megatons, so 1.4 million tons. Which they say is a conservative estimate. If you add that to their existing estimate, their total footprint is closer to 5 megatons other than the 3.6 that they have announced. Which, according to Carbon Market Watch, is the main problem with the accounting. The artificial spread of emissions, saying we're only responsible for this small share, is a big problem. The 2 main standards. The 2 major standards are called Verified Carbon Standard and Gold Standard. These are independent organizations, but instead of buying credits from the aforementioned independent organizations. According to Carbon Market Watch, The Qatari organizers have basically set up their own standard, which is the Global Carbon Council, which raises serious questions about the independence of that standard, because the whole point of having a standard is to have this third party that can be there as an external voice to guarantee the quality of the credits. Carbon Market Watch claim that the organizers have purchased credits from 3 projects. Since they published a report, there's a third one that has sold credits. All of them are renewable energy projects. The issue with those credits, according to Carbon Market Watch, it's not really credible to compensate your emissions with those because these projects are non-additional, which is a technical term to say that basically these projects will happen anyway, regardless of whether they can sell credits or not. According to Carbon Market Watch, FIFA is claiming they are paying for these extra reductions, and thanks to FIFA money, they are offsetting emissions. The reality is basically they're sending some money to a project that doesn't need it. They say the emissions reductions that are generated by those projects, 2 of them are in Turkey. 1 is in Serbia, but they are completely unrelated to the purchase of carbon credits by FIFA. So according to Carbon Market Watch, it's just inaccurate to say that this compensates for any sort of emissions. Dismountable stadiums. And there is an interesting accounting study and report from FIFA on the dismountable stadium where they basically explained that actually the footprint of the dismountable stadium is higher than of a regular stadium. They need robust material, which by and large is more carbon production intense because it needs to be to sustain the dismounting and transport and reassembly. Transport is also an issue. So the overall impact really depends on how much is going to be reused and how far and how many times is going to be transported. It should also be noted that there are plans to donate around 200,000 stadium seats to other projects to help reduce the impact of other sporting projects. So in conclusion, can the World Cup be carbon neutral? In order to propose a truly carbon neutral event, you will also need to offset your remaining carbon emissions by financing mitigation initiatives such as reforestation projects or new renewable energy developments. Nowadays, more and more companies pledge to become carbon neutral, net zero, or even climate positive. With global corporations, who claim that they are the first company to eliminate its carbon legacy, we may ask, how is it possible? Terms like carbon neutrality, net zero, or climate positive have been around for a while, but for the last couple of years, small startups to global corporations have integrated them, mainly for mainstream marketing purposes. The diversity of phrases and the lack of clarity around them can mislead well-intentioned consumers. However, communicating transparently about them may encourage businesses to be more proactive. With the quality of carbon offsetting still lacking, lack of infrastructure in places where the World Cups are hosted, and the level of technology development to date for green energy, it's clear at this moment in time no event can be fully carbon neutral. This was a report from Dynamic Sport Marketing, connecting your goals in the changing landscape of sports.